The evening rain pelted against the massive windows of Blake Harrison's Malibu mansion. At 45, the tech billionaire had everything money could buy, yet the sprawling oceanfront property felt emptier with each passing day. 5 years had passed since the tragic accident that changed his life forever, leaving him with nothing but hollow success and memories that haunted every corner of his home. Thunder crashed outside as Blake poured himself another glass of bourbon. His personal chef had left hours ago, and his housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, had the weekend off. The solitude suited him. It had become his only companion since losing his family. His empire of software companies and tech investments continued to grow, but Blake had retreated from the world, conducting business through video calls and intermediaries. Few people had seen him in person over the past years. The unexpected knock at the door startled him. Visitors were rare, especially on a stormy Friday night. Blake considered ignoring it, but something, perhaps the unusual persistence of the knocking, drove him to the door. What he found on his doorstep stunned him into silence. A young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, stood drenched from the rain. Her clothes were worn and faded, her dark blonde hair plastered to her face. But what caught his attention was the small child in her arms, a little girl about 4 years old asleep against her mother's shoulder. "I'm so sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice trembling, either from cold or fear or both. "My name is Emma Taylor. Our car broke down on the highway and yours was the only house with lights on." She hesitated, swallowing her pride. "I was wondering if I could clean your house or do any work in exchange for some food for my daughter. We haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Blake stared at them, momentarily speechless. The desperation in the woman's eyes was unmistakable but genuine. Years of business negotiations had taught him to recognize sincerity. "You want to clean my house? At this hour? In exchange for food?" he finally asked, his voice gruffer than intended. "Yes, sir. Anything you need. I'm a hard worker." Emma's chin lifted slightly, a small gesture of dignity despite her circumstances. Blake was about to respond when the child in her arms stirred. The little girl yawned and slowly raised her head from her mother's shoulder, blinking sleepily as she looked around. When her eyes met Blake's, he felt the ground shift beneath him. Those eyes, a unique shade of green with a ring of gold around the pupils, the heart-shaped face, the small birthmark near her right temple, even the way she tilted her head slightly as she studied him with curiosity. Blake grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. It was impossible, absolutely impossible, but the resemblance was undeniable. This child looked exactly like his daughter Sophie had at that age, every detail, down to the questioning arch of her eyebrows. "Mommy, I'm cold," the little girl whispered, bringing Blake back to the moment. "Please come in," he said abruptly, stepping aside. "You're both soaked." Relief washed over Emma's face. "Thank you, sir. I promise we won't be any trouble." The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. Blake moved mechanically, turning on lights and adjusting the thermostat while his mind raced. He found clean towels in a drawer and handed them to Emma. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual as he opened the refrigerator. "Sophie," Emma replied, drying her daughter's hair with the towel. "Sophie Grace Taylor." Blake nearly dropped the container he was holding. Sophie. The same name, the same face. It couldn't be coincidence, yet what else could it be? That's a beautiful name," he managed to say. "I have some pasta and salad from dinner, and there's soup I can heat up." As he prepared the food, Blake couldn't stop watching the little girl. Every gesture, every expression was like witnessing a ghost. Sophie was now sitting at his kitchen island, swinging her legs and humming softly to herself. The same unconscious habit his daughter had. "We've been having a rough time," Emma explained quietly as she helped set plates. "My husband left us 2 years ago when his business failed. I've been working temp jobs, but 3 months ago, the restaurant where I was waitressing closed down. We lost our apartment last week." She glanced at her daughter, lowering her voice. "We've been sleeping in our car. I've applied everywhere, but nothing yet." Blake nodded, barely registering her words as he placed the warmed food in front of them. Emma thanked him profusely, then watched with a mixture of gratitude and sadness as her daughter ate hungrily. "Slow down, sweetheart," she said gently. "There's plenty." "This is yummy," Sophie said between bites, offering Blake a smile that nearly stopped his heart. "Thank you, mister." "You're welcome," he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You can call me Blake." As they ate, Blake noticed Sophie looking intently at something behind him. He turned to see what had caught her attention, a large framed photograph on the wall. It showed Blake with his wife Caroline and their daughter Sophie at the beach, all smiles and sunshine from a happier time. Sophie slid off her stool and walked over to the picture, studying it with the intense focus unique to children. "That girl looks like me," she said, pointing at the image of his daughter. Emma glanced up, then froze. The resemblance was indeed striking, impossible to miss. She looked at Blake with new awareness, questions forming in her eyes. "She was my daughter," Blake said quietly. "Her name was Sophie, too." "Where is she now?" the little girl asked innocently. Before Blake could formulate an answer, Sophie reached out and touched his hand. Her small fingers were warm against his skin. "You look sad," she observed. "My mommy gets sad too sometimes." Then, with the natural empathy of children, she wrapped her arms around his leg in a hug. "It's okay. Don't be sad." Blake felt something break inside him, a dam that had held back emotion for 5 years. He looked at Emma, who was watching with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Your daughter," he began, struggling to find words. "The resemblance is extraordinary. It's not just her appearance, but her mannerisms, the way she speaks." Emma nodded slowly. "I noticed you staring. I'm sorry if it brings up painful memories." "No, it's more than that," Blake said, his mind racing with impossible theories. "There's something I need to check. If you'll excuse me for a moment." He walked to his study, closed the door, and pulled up files he hadn't looked at in years. The accident report, hospital records, insurance claims. He'd been too devastated at the time to question anything, trusting his then business partner Alex Whitman to handle the details while he grieved. When he returned to the kitchen, his face was pale but determined. "Emma, I know this will sound strange, but I need to ask you something. Sophie, was she adopted?" Emma's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with protective instinct. "Yes, but how could you possibly know that?" "Because," Blake said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "I think she might be my daughter." Emma instinctively pulled Sophie closer to her side, her expression shifting from gratitude to wariness. "And what are you talking about?" Her voice was low but tense, careful not to alarm her daughter, who was now coloring with crayons Blake had found in a drawer. Another uncanny similarity, as she held the crayon in the same unusual grip his Sophie had. "I know how it sounds," Blake said, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "But please, just hear me out." He gestured toward his study, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma nodded. "Sophie, sweetie, Mommy's going to talk to Mr. Blake for a minute. You stay here and finish your picture, okay?" "Okay, Mommy." The little girl didn't look up, absorbed in her artwork. Inside the study, Blake showed Emma to a leather chair and took a seat across from her. The walls were lined with books and awards, remnants of a life once actively lived. 5 years ago, he began, choosing his words carefully, "my wife Caroline and I were driving back from a weekend trip with our daughter Sophie. There was an accident on Highway 1. He paused, the memory still raw. Caroline was severely injured and has been in a long-term care facility ever since. She's in a persistent vegetative state with no chance of recovery." Emma's expression softened slightly, but her guard remained up. "I was told our daughter didn't survive the impact," Blake continued. "There was a fire after the crash. The identification was complicated. I was in shock, devastated. I was in shock. I trusted my business partner Alex to handle the details while I stayed at Caroline's bedside, praying for a miracle that never came." He pulled out a file and opened it on the coffee table between them. There was another car involved in the accident, a couple with their young daughter. According to these reports, the couple survived with injuries, but their daughter was badly hurt. She was taken to a different hospital. "What does this have to do with my Sophie?" Emma asked, though her voice suggested she was beginning to connect the dots. "The couple's names were Daniel and Rebecca Taylor," Blake said quietly. Emma's face paled. Those are my cousin and his wife. They were in a serious accident 5 years ago. They recovered physically but were devastated because they were told their daughter didn't make it." "And then what happened?" Blake pressed gently. "About 6 months after the accident, they called me. They knew I'd been trying to adopt as a single mother, but kept hitting roadblocks. They told me about a little girl who needed a home. She'd been in the hospital for months recovering from injuries, then placed in foster care. No one had claimed her. Emma's voice trembled. They helped me expedite the adoption through a private agency. I never questioned it. I was just grateful to have Sophie. Blake nodded, pieces falling into place. And your cousin and his wife? They moved to Australia a few years ago. They needed a fresh start. Emma looked up suddenly. Are you suggesting there was some kind of mix-up with the children in the accident? That Sophie is actually your daughter? Not a mix-up, Blake said grimly. I think it was deliberate. He pulled out another document, an email chain between Alex Whitman and someone from a private adoption agency. The messages were cryptic, but contained references to ensuring permanent separation and completing the plan as discussed. My business partner Alex and I had a falling out shortly before the accident, Blake explained. I caught him embezzling funds and reported him to the board. He was ousted from the company we built together and faced potential charges. He swore he'd make me suffer. Emma's eyes widened as the implications sank in. You think he orchestrated this whole thing? That he arranged for your daughter to be taken away from you and given to me? I think he saw an opportunity in the chaos of the accident, Blake said. From what I'm piecing together, he had someone at the hospital falsify records. The identification was already challenging due to the fire. Your cousin's daughter was likely the one who didn't survive, while my Sophie was severely injured but alive. Alex made sure I believed my daughter was gone, while arranging for her to be placed in the adoption system. That's monstrous, Emma whispered. The ultimate revenge, Blake agreed, his voice hollow. He knew losing my family would destroy me more than any financial ruin could. They sat in heavy silence, the magnitude of the deception settling over them. I need to be certain, Blake finally said. Would you allow a DNA test? I have connections. We could have results within 24 hours. Emma looked torn, fear crossing her features. And if she is your daughter, what then? She's my daughter too now, the only mother she remembers. I've raised her for 4 years. I don't know, Blake admitted. But don't we both deserve the truth? After a long moment, Emma nodded. Yes, we do. They returned to the kitchen to find Sophie had created an elaborate drawing of what appeared to be the three of them, holding hands in front of a house with a rainbow overhead. The innocent image struck them both into silence. Look what I made, Sophie held up her artwork proudly. It's us. You looked sad, so I drew you happy instead. Blake felt his throat tighten. It's beautiful, Sophie. Thank you. Are we staying here tonight? Sophie asked her mother, yawning. I'm tired. Emma looked at Blake questioningly. Of course you are, he said without hesitation. It's still pouring outside and it's late. I have plenty of guest rooms. While Emma helped Sophie get ready for bed in one of the guest suites, Blake made some calls. By morning, a doctor would arrive discreetly to take DNA samples. He also reached out to a private investigator he trusted, someone who could dig deeper into Alex's machinations. After tucking Sophie in, Emma found Blake on the terrace, protected from the rain but facing the churning ocean. The storm mirrored the turbulence they both felt. She fell asleep immediately, Emma said, joining him. It's been a while since she's had a real bed. Blake nodded, still processing everything. Emma, regardless of what we discover tomorrow, I want you to know something. You saved her. You gave her a loving home when I couldn't. If she is my daughter, I will be forever grateful to you for that. Emma's eyes welled with tears. She's my whole world. The thought of losing her. No one's talking about you losing her, Blake said gently. Whatever happens, Sophie's well-being comes first. She needs stability, security, and love. And if she's your daughter, Emma asked, the question hanging heavy in the damp air. Then we figure it out together, Blake said. I've missed 5 years of her life. I wouldn't dream of traumatizing her by tearing her away from the only mother she knows. Emma studied him, searching for deception but finding only sincerity. You're not what I expected from a billionaire. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. And you're not what I expected to find on my doorstep tonight. The morning brought clear skies and a surreal sense of calm. Sophie woke up excited to explore the massive house, while Blake arranged for a shopping trip to get them necessities. Emma had only a small backpack with a few changes of clothes for them both. The doctor arrived mid-morning, a discreet woman, who explained to Sophie they were playing a game where she needed to swish some water in her mouth. The little girl complied happily, especially when promised ice cream afterward. While they waited for results, Blake showed them around the property. Sophie was delighted by the indoor pool and the elaborate playroom that had remained untouched for 5 years. Emma noticed how Blake softened around her daughter, the haunted look in his eyes temporarily lifting. "You have a princess room," Sophie exclaimed when they came to a pink bedroom with a canopy bed and walls covered in twinkling lights. "This was my daughter's room," Blake said quietly to Emma. "I couldn't bear to change it." "It's beautiful," Emma replied. She hesitated, then added, "You know, even if the test shows she's not your daughter, there's still a little girl who needs help. We're grateful for your kindness regardless of what happens next." Blake nodded, watching Sophie twirl in the middle of the room, the sunlight catching her hair. "Kindness has been in short supply in my life lately. Perhaps it's time for that to change." They were eating lunch when Blake's phone rang. He stepped away to take the call, and when he returned, his face told Emma everything she needed to know. "The results?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Blake nodded, eyes fixed on Sophie, who was happily arranging her cucumber slices into a smiley face. "She's my daughter." Emma sat perfectly still, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen island so tightly her knuckles turned white. The confirmation, though expected after their conversation last night, hit her with the force of a physical blow. "I need some air," she whispered, standing abruptly. Blake nodded in understanding. "Sophie, would you like to watch a movie in the theater room? Mrs. Rodriguez just arrived and she makes the best popcorn in California. You have a movie theater." Sophie's eyes widened with delight. "Can I watch Frozen?" "Absolutely," Blake smiled, the expression still feeling foreign on his face after years of absence. "Mrs. Rodriguez will set everything up. I need to talk with your mom for a bit." After Mrs. Rodriguez, who took the unexpected presence of a woman and child in her employer's home with professional aplomb, led Sophie to the theater room, Blake found Emma on the cliffside deck, staring out at the ocean. "I've imagined this moment," Emma said, without turning around. "Nightmare scenarios where someone would come and take her away from me. I never thought it would be like this." Blake leaned against the railing beside her, careful to give her space. "No one is taking her away from you, aren't they?" Emma finally turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "She's your biological daughter. You're one of the richest men in America. I'm an unemployed single mother living out of a car. What judge wouldn't give you custody?" "I'm not taking this to a judge," Blake said firmly. "Emma, look at me. The last thing I want is to traumatize Sophie. She knows you as her mother. You've raised her, loved her, protected her. I would never tear her away from you." "Then what do you want?" Emma asked, vulnerability and fear evident in her voice. Blake took a deep breath. "I want the chance to know my daughter. I've lost 5 years, years I can never get back. But I also recognize that you're as much her parent as I am now, maybe more so. What I'm proposing is a partnership of sorts." "A partnership?" Emma repeated, skepticism coloring her tone. "Stay here, both of you," Blake said. "This house has more than enough room. Sophie can get to know me gradually at her own pace. Meanwhile, you'll have stability, security. Sophie will have everything she needs, good schools, healthcare, opportunities." Emma shook her head. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Blake countered. "It's providing for my daughter and the woman who saved her when I couldn't. Besides, the estate needs help. Mrs. Rodriguez is getting older and has been asking for assistance for years. If you want to earn your keep, the position is yours. And when Sophie starts asking questions, when she wants to know why we suddenly moved in with a stranger," Emma challenged. "We'll tell her the truth in an age-appropriate way," Blake said. "That I'm an old friend of your family who needed help, and you needed a place to stay. As she gets older, we can share more. Children are adaptable, Emma. They understand more than we give them credit for." Emma turned back to the ocean, considering his words. "And what about Alex, the man who orchestrated all this?" Blake's expression hardened. "My investigator is building a case. Identity fraud, kidnapping, medical fraud. He'll face justice. But that's secondary right now. Sophie comes first." "I need time to think," Emma said finally. "Of course," Blake nodded. "Take all the time you need, but please, stay here while you decide, at least for a few days." After a moment, Emma agreed. "A few days. But I need something from you in return. Name it." "I want to visit the hospital where the accident victims were treated. I need to see the records for myself, to understand exactly what happened." Blake studied her, recognizing the need for closure. "We'll go tomorrow." The rest of the day passed in a strange domestic tableau. Sophie, oblivious to the life-altering revelations swirling around her, explored the mansion with delight, asking innocent questions about the empty rooms and covered furniture. Blake found himself remembering how to smile, how to see his home through the eyes of a child again. Emma watched them both carefully, noting the similarities that now seemed obvious. The same contemplative furrow of the brow, the same musical laugh. After Sophie went to bed, exhausted from the excitement, Blake showed Emma to his study again. "There's something else you should see," he said, pulling up security camera footage on his computer. This was taken the day after the accident at the hospital. The grainy video showed a well-dressed man in conversation with a doctor in a hallway. Even with the poor quality, Emma could see money changing hands. "That's Alex," Blake confirmed, "and Dr. James Warner, who was the attending physician for both accident scenes. He conveniently left the country shortly after and now practices in Switzerland. He looks so normal," Emma murmured, studying Alex's face. "How could someone do something so cruel?" "Revenge warps people," Blake said simply. "Alex lost everything when I reported his embezzlement, his reputation, his wealth, his marriage. In his mind, it was only fair that I lose everything too." Emma shuddered. "What about my cousin and his wife? Did they know?" "I don't think so," Blake said. "From what my investigator has found, they were told their daughter didn't survive. The grief counselor who worked with them was also on Alex's payroll. He guided them toward helping you adopt an orphaned child, as a way to process their grief. They wanted to give me the happiness they'd lost," Emma said softly. "They thought they were doing something beautiful, healing." Blake nodded, the cruelty of the deception still staggering. Alex engineered the perfect cover. Everyone acted exactly as he anticipated, out of grief and love. The next morning, they drove to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Blake had arranged a meeting with the hospital's chief administrator, an old friend who owed him several favors. Sophie stayed behind with Mrs. Rodriguez, engaged in a baking project that had the kitchen smelling of chocolate and cinnamon. Dr. Elaine Chen greeted them in her office, her expression grave as Blake explained the situation. "What you're describing is a serious breach of medical ethics and potentially several felonies," she said after hearing them out. "I'll need to report this to the authorities." "We understand," Blake said, "but first we need to see the records from that night. The complete records, not the doctored versions Alex arranged." Dr. Chen nodded. "Medical records are backed up on multiple secure servers. If someone altered the official records, there would still be original entries in the backup system." She typed rapidly on her computer, accessing archives that required multiple levels of security clearance. After several minutes of searching, she turned the screen toward them. "Here," she said, pointing to admission records from the night of the accident. 2 children were brought in. One was declared unrecoverable at the scene. That would be the Taylor child. The other, listed as female child Doe, was admitted in critical condition but stabilized after surgery. She scrolled down, revealing more records. "There's a note here from Dr. Warner requesting a DNA test to confirm identity, given the confusion at the accident scene. But the test was cancelled the next day, with a note saying identification confirmed through personal effects." "That's when Alex stepped in," Blake said grimly. "It appears so," Dr. Chen agreed. "The child recovered remarkably well, but instead of being released to family, she was transferred to a private pediatric rehabilitation facility in San Diego." She looked up at them. "A facility owned by Whitman Healthcare, Alex Whitman's side business," Emma gasped softly. "And from there to foster care, and then to me." "The adoption agency that contacted you," Blake asked. "Do you remember its name?" Emma thought for a moment. "New Beginnings Family Services. My cousin's grief counselor recommended them." Dr. Chen did another search. New Beginnings was incorporated 6 years ago by Whitman Enterprises as a subsidiary. It was dissolved 3 years ago after completing only 7 adoptions. 7 families he manipulated, Emma whispered. "Or 7 children he relocated to cover his tracks," Blake added darkly. Dr. Chen printed the relevant documents for them, along with a formal letter acknowledging the hospital's preliminary findings, pending a full investigation. As they left the hospital, Emma was unusually quiet. Blake gave her space, driving in silence until she finally spoke. "I keep thinking about the Taylor child," she said softly. "The little girl who didn't make it. In a way, Alex stole her identity too, not just Sophie's. She deserves to be remembered for who she was, not as part of his scheme. Blake nodded, touched by Emma's compassion, even in the midst of her own turmoil. You're right. When this is all over, we should find a way to honor her memory. They stopped for lunch at a quiet beachside restaurant, both needing a moment to process everything they'd learned. As they sat overlooking the Pacific, Emma finally asked the question that had been building since yesterday. Blake, what happens now, really? He considered her question carefully. Now we build a case against Alex. We ensure Sophie's legal status is clarified without disrupting her life. And he hesitated. We try to create something stable from this chaos. And your wife? Emma asked gently. Caroline, you said she's in a care facility? A shadow crossed Blake's face. Yes, I visit her every week. The doctors say there's no chance of recovery, but I haven't been able to let go. She's still legally my wife. Emma reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, the first voluntary contact she'd initiated. I understand, and I'm sorry for all you've lost. I'm starting to think, Blake said, looking at her with new perspective, that perhaps it's time to focus on what I've found. When they returned to the mansion, they found Sophie and Mrs. Rodriguez had created a welcome banner and a slightly lopsided chocolate cake with "Welcome Home," written in wobbly blue frosting. Surprise! Sophie exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. Mrs. R said you might be sad today because of grown-up stuff, so we made you a happy cake. Emma knelt down to hug her daughter, tears threatening. It's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen. Over Sophie's head, her eyes met Blake's and a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever complications lay ahead, they would face them together, for the sake of the child they both loved. The next 2 weeks settled into an unexpected routine. Emma and Sophie moved into the east wing of the mansion, giving them privacy while still being part of the household. Blake returned to work, actually going into his company's headquarters for the first time in years, much to the shock of his employees. The tabloids quickly caught wind of the mysterious woman and child who had taken up residence with the reclusive billionaire, but Blake's security team kept the paparazzi at bay. For Sophie, it was an adventure. The mansion became her playground, with Mrs. Rodriguez teaching her to bake, Blake showing her how to swim in the indoor pool, and Emma ensuring her education didn't lapse despite their circumstances. The little girl blossomed in the stable environment, her natural curiosity and intelligence shining through. Emma found purpose in the arrangement too. She took over management of the household from Mrs. Rodriguez, who was grateful to step back to a less demanding role. Emma's organizational skills and practical nature complemented Blake's more abstract approach to life, and soon the mansion ran more efficiently than it had in years. Blake, for his part, felt like a man awakening from a long slumber. Having Sophie in the house brought back memories, but instead of being painful, they felt like stepping stones back to humanity. He found himself looking forward to coming home, to hearing Sophie's excited recounting of her day, to the family dinners that had become a nightly ritual. The three of them were in the garden one sunny afternoon when Blake's private investigator, Michael Jenkins, arrived with an update. While Sophie explored the butterfly garden with Mrs. Rodriguez, the adults gathered in Blake's study. We've got him, Michael said without preamble, placing a thick folder on the desk. Alex Whitman left a trail a mile wide once we knew where to look. Falsified medical records, bribery of medical personnel, illegal transfers of a minor across state lines, identity fraud, misappropriation of medical insurance funds. Will it be enough for charges? Blake asked, leafing through the evidence. More than enough, Michael confirmed. The FBI is already involved. They've been building a case against Whitman for financial crimes, and this adds a whole new dimension. They're particularly interested in the other adoptions arranged through New Beginnings. Were they all like Sophie's case? Emma asked, horrified at the thought. Michael shook his head. No, it seems Sophie was special. Alex's personal revenge project. The others were more straightforward cases of expedited adoptions with falsified paperwork to skip the waiting period. Illegal, but not malicious in the same way. So what happens now? Blake asked. The FBI wants to interview both of you, and they'll need to establish Sophie's identity formally. That means more DNA tests, this time court-admissible ones. Michael glanced at Emma. They also want to speak with your cousins in Australia. Emma nodded. I'll contact them. They should know the truth. There's one more thing, Michael added, looking uncomfortable. Alex Whitman knows we're onto him. He's been liquidating assets and making arrangements to leave the country. We need to move quickly. Let him run, Blake said dismissively. The authorities can handle it. It's not that simple, Michael warned. He's desperate and he knows the penalty for what he's done will be severe. A cornered animal is dangerous, Blake. You think he might try something? Emma asked, alarmed. I've arranged additional security, Michael assured her. But yes, it's a possibility we need to consider. After Michael left, Blake found Emma in the kitchen, aggressively chopping vegetables for dinner, her movements betraying her anxiety. We should leave, she said without looking up. Take Sophie somewhere safe until this is over. This is the safest place you could be, Blake countered. The security system is state-of-the-art, and I've added guards at every entrance. It's not enough, Emma insisted. You don't know Alex like I do. Blake paused, confused. What do you mean? You know Alex. Emma's knife stilled. She set it down carefully and turned to face him. I didn't realize it until I saw his picture in the hospital security footage. He used a different name, but yes, I've met him. He was the one who personally handled Sophie's adoption. He called himself Alan White and said he was the director of New Beginnings. Why didn't you mention this before? Blake asked, struggling to keep accusation from his tone. Because I only just made the connection, Emma said defensively. It was 5 years ago, Blake. I was focused on becoming a mother, not memorizing the face of every person involved. Blake took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. You're right. I'm sorry, but this changes things. If Alex was directly involved with placing Sophie with you, it means his plan was even more calculated than we thought. Which is why we need to leave, Emma persisted. He's had 5 years to plan this. Do you really think he'll just give up now? Before Blake could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Michael. Blake, Whitman's gone, Michael said without preamble. His private jet filed a flight plan for the Cayman Islands, but never arrived. We think it's a diversion. Increase security here immediately, Blake ordered. And put a trace on his known associates. After hanging up, he turned to Emma. You're right. We need to move Sophie to a secure location. I have a property in Montana, remote, isolated, with its own security. We can leave tonight. Emma nodded, relieved. I'll pack our things. Pack light, Blake advised. We can get whatever else we need once we're there. They were in the midst of preparations when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Rodriguez answered it, then came to find Blake in his study. Mr. Harrison, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent. Something about your wife. Blake and Emma exchanged concerned glances. Did he give a name? Dr. Reynolds. He said he's from the care facility. Blake frowned. I don't know any Dr. Reynolds at the facility. Caroline's doctor is Dr. Mitchell. Emma's face paled. Alex. Blake moved quickly, activating the security system's lockdown protocol from his phone. Steel shutters began to descend over the windows and doors. Mrs. Rodriguez, take Sophie to the safe room now, he instructed. Use the passage from the pantry. Emma, go with them. What about you? Emma asked, already moving toward the kitchen where Sophie was having a snack. I'll handle this, Blake said grimly. Go. The security monitors showed a well-dressed man in his late 40s standing in the foyer, an expensive briefcase in hand. He looked respectable, professional, nothing like a man on the run from federal charges, but the set of his shoulders and the calculating look in his eyes confirmed Blake's suspicions. Alex Whitman had come to finish what he started. Blake opened a concealed safe in his study wall and removed a handgun. He checked that it was loaded, then tucked it into his waistband at the small of his back, covered by his jacket. He wasn't a violent man, but he would protect his newfound family at all costs. When he entered the foyer, Alex smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that didn't reach his eyes. Blake Harrison, he said smoothly, you're looking well. Much better than the last time I saw you, drowning in grief and bourbon. What do you want, Alex? Blake kept his voice level, positioning himself between Alex and the hallway that led to the kitchen. Just to talk. Alex set his briefcase down carefully. To explain my side of things before the authorities twist the narrative. You always were a reasonable man, Blake. I thought you deserved that courtesy. There's nothing to explain, Blake said coldly. You stole my daughter from me. You made me believe she was gone forever. There's no justification for that. Alex's smile faltered slightly. You took everything from me, Blake. My company, my reputation, my future. An eye for an eye seemed perfectly justified. I reported your crimes, Blake countered. You were embezzling millions. Did you think I would look the other way? I built that company with you. Alex's composed facade cracked, revealing the rage beneath. One mistake, and you threw me to the wolves. No second chances, no opportunity to make it right. Just swift, merciless judgment from the righteous Blake Harrison. So you decided to play God with my family? Blake stepped forward, anger rising. With innocent children. Alex regained his composure, smoothing down his tie. I never intended for anyone to be hurt. The Taylor child was already gone when the opportunity presented itself. I simply redistributed the survivors. Your daughter got a loving home with a struggling single mother. Poetic, don't you think? The billionaire's princess, raised in near poverty. You're sick, Blake said, disgust evident in his voice. And now you're going to prison for a very long time. Alex laughed softly. I don't think so, Blake. You see, I've made certain arrangements. Insurance policies, you might call them. He reached for his briefcase. The adoption papers, the falsified death certificates, the medical records, all the evidence linking me to this unfortunate situation is right here. I'm prepared to hand it all over, along with a full confession. Blake eyed the briefcase suspiciously. In exchange for what? Safe passage, Alex said simply. And $10 million. A small price for reuniting a father with his long-lost daughter, wouldn't you say? You really think I'll just let you walk away after what you've done? Blake asked incredulously. I think you value your daughter's well-being above revenge, Alex replied smoothly. The media attention alone would be traumatic for her. Imagine the headlines. Billionaire's daughter caught in kidnapping scandal. The interviews, the court appearances, her face splashed across every tabloid in the country. Is that what you want for her? Blake hesitated, the scenario all too plausible. And if I refuse? Alex shrugged. Then I release my own version of events to the press. A story about a power-mad billionaire who stole a child from her adoptive mother using his wealth and connections. About falsified DNA tests and corrupt officials. It would be your word against mine, and I've always been the better storyteller. The standoff was interrupted by a small voice from the hallway. Mr. Blake? Mrs. R says dinner's almost ready. Both men turned to see Sophie standing in the doorway, curiosity on her face as she took in the tense scene. Behind her, Emma appeared, her expression shifting from concern to horror when she saw Alex. Sophie, come here, Emma called urgently. But Sophie, with a child's innocent lack of self-preservation, was already moving forward, looking at Alex with interest. Hello, she said politely. Are you Mr. Blake's friend? Alex stared at the child, something unreadable crossing his features. Hello, Sophie. Yes, I'm an old friend of Mr. Blake's. Blake moved protectively towards Sophie, but Alex raised a warning hand. Careful, Blake, let's keep this civil. Sophie, oblivious to the danger, continued her approach. How do you know my name? I know lots of things, Alex said, his voice gentler than before. I know you like strawberry ice cream and that your favorite movie is Frozen. I know you sleep with a stuffed elephant named Ellie. Sophie's eyes widened. How did you know about Ellie? Sophie, please come here, Emma pleaded, slowly moving closer. Alex glanced between the child and her mother, then back at Blake. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even remorse. He looked down at Sophie one last time, then picked up his briefcase. I'll be in touch, Blake, he said quietly. You have 24 hours to consider my offer. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, the sound of sirens filled the air. Through the windows, they could see police cars pulling up to the gates. Alex's face hardened. You called them? No, Blake said honestly, but my security system automatically alerts the authorities when it goes into lockdown. For a moment, it seemed Alex might make a desperate move. His hand twitched toward his jacket, and Blake tensed, ready to shield Sophie. But then Alex's shoulders slumped in defeat. It was a perfect plan, he said softly, almost to himself. Everything accounted for except his eyes drifted to Sophie, who was now safely in Emma's arms. Except how much she looks like you. The minute I saw her just now, I knew anyone would see the truth. As the police entered and took Alex into custody, Blake watched his former friend being led away. The man who had orchestrated such elaborate cruelty looked suddenly small, diminished by the failure of his revenge. Emma approached Blake, still holding Sophie, who was confused by all the commotion. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. Blake put an arm around them both, forming a protective circle. "Yes, it's over." But as he watched the police cars drive away, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that closing one chapter had only opened another, equally challenging one. The truth was out. Justice would be served, but the real work, building a life together, was just beginning. The aftermath of Alex's arrest brought a flurry of activity to the Harrison mansion. FBI agents conducted interviews, lawyers filed paperwork, and journalists camped at the gates, hungry for details of the sensational story. Through it all, Blake, Emma, and Mrs. Rodriguez worked to maintain a sense of normalcy for Sophie, shielding her from the chaos as much as possible. 1 week after Alex's arrest, Blake and Emma sat in the office of Patricia Winters, one of the top family law attorneys in California. The elegant older woman reviewed their case file with practiced efficiency. "Legally speaking, this is unprecedented," Patricia said, looking up from the documents. "We have DNA confirmation that Sophie is biologically Mr. Harrison's daughter, presumed lost in the accident 5 years ago. However, Ms. Taylor has been her legal adoptive mother for 4 years, with all proper, if fraudulently obtained, documentation." "What does that mean for Sophie?" Emma asked, tension evident in her voice. "It means we need to establish a new legal framework," Patricia explained. "The courts will recognize both Mr. Harrison's biological claim and Ms. Taylor's established parental relationship. What we need to determine is how you both wish to proceed." Blake and Emma exchanged glances. They had discussed this extensively over the past week, late into the night after Sophie was asleep. "We want to establish joint legal custody," Blake said firmly. "Emma will remain Sophie's primary caretaker, but I want legal recognition as her father and the ability to make decisions regarding her well-being." Patricia nodded, making notes. "And living arrangements?" "Emma and Sophie will continue to live at my residence," Blake explained. "We've established a comfortable arrangement that's working well for everyone, especially Sophie." "I see," Patricia said, her expression carefully neutral. "And the nature of your relationship with each other?" Emma shifted uncomfortably. "We're co-parents, friends." "Nothing more?" Patricia pressed. "No," Blake confirmed, though something in his tone made Emma glance at him curiously. "Very well," Patricia said, closing the file. "I'll draft the necessary paperwork. Given the extraordinary circumstances and Mr. Harrison's resources, I believe we can expedite the process. However, I should warn you both. The court will want to ensure this arrangement is in Sophie's best interest. That means interviews with child psychologists, home evaluations, and scrutiny of your relationship dynamic." "We understand," Emma said. "We just want what's best for Sophie." As they left the lawyer's office, Blake's phone rang. The care facility where Caroline was housed was calling, a rare occurrence that immediately put him on alert. "Mr. Harrison," the director said, her voice professionally compassionate, "I'm afraid there's been a change in your wife's condition. Could you come in as soon as possible?" Blake's heart raced. She's stable," the director assured him. "But we've detected some new neural activity that Dr. Mitchell would like to discuss with you in person." After explaining the situation to Emma, Blake drove directly to Sunnyvale Care Center, a state-of-the-art facility nestled in the hills above Santa Barbara. He had spared no expense in Caroline's care, ensuring she had the best doctors, the latest treatments, and a beautiful, peaceful environment, even if she wasn't conscious to appreciate it. Dr. Mitchell met him in Caroline's private suite. The room was bright and airy, with large windows overlooking the ocean. Fresh flowers sat on the bedside table. Blake had them delivered weekly. Caroline herself appeared unchanged, her slender form still beneath the blankets, her blonde hair neatly brushed, her face serene and unresponsive. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Dr. Mitchell said, gesturing Blake to a chair. "As I told the director, we've detected some unusual brain activity in Mrs. Harrison over the past few days." "What kind of activity?" Blake asked, hope rising despite his efforts to temper it. "Increased responses to stimuli," Dr. Mitchell explained, showing Blake a tablet with brain scan images. "It's subtle, but definite. When we play music, show photos, Even just speak in the room, we're seeing patterns we haven't observed before. What does it mean? Blake asked, his eyes fixed on Caroline's peaceful face. Dr. Mitchell chose his words carefully. I don't want to give you false hope, Mr. Harrison. Your wife's condition remains extremely serious. The damage was extensive and the prognosis hasn't fundamentally changed. However, these new patterns suggest some level of awareness that wasn't present before. She can hear us? Blake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Possibly, Dr. Mitchell said. To what extent, we can't be certain. But it might be beneficial to increase stimulation. More visits, more familiar voices and music, personal items from home. Blake nodded, reaching for Caroline's hand. It felt the same as it had for 5 years, warm but unresponsive. I'll come more often and... He hesitated. I'd like to bring someone with me next time. My daughter. Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. Your daughter? I understood she was... It's a long story, Blake interrupted. But she's alive, she's 5 years old now, and I think Caroline should meet her. If there's any chance she can hear us, can sense what's happening. I think that would be appropriate, Dr. Mitchell agreed. Family connections can be powerful stimuli. Back at the mansion, Blake found Emma and Sophie in the garden, planting flowers in a section Mrs. Rodriguez had designated as Sophie's Corner. The domestic scene made his heart constrict with a complex mixture of emotions. Gratitude, tenderness, and a growing affection he wasn't quite ready to name. How did it go at the facility? Emma asked when Sophie ran off to fetch more seedlings from the greenhouse. Blake explained the doctor's findings, watching emotions play across Emma's expressive face, compassion, concern, and something else he couldn't quite identify. That's wonderful news, she said sincerely. Even small improvements are meaningful. Doctor, Mitchell suggested I bring Sophie next time, Blake said carefully, watching for her reaction. If that's all right with you. Emma was quiet for a moment, digging in the soil with her trowel. Have you thought about what you'll tell her? Sophie, I mean. The truth, in simple terms, Blake said. That Caroline is my wife, Sophie's biological mother, and that she's been very sick for a long time. That we're hoping our visits might help her get better. And if she asks why Caroline doesn't know her, why she hasn't been in her life, Blake sighed. Then we explain about the accident, about the mix-up, about how Sophie ended up with you instead. She's smart, Emma. She already knows something unusual is happening. She asked me yesterday why the people outside the gates keep taking pictures of our house. Emma nodded reluctantly. You're right. We can't shield her forever. But let me help prepare her, please. She trusts me to explain difficult things. Of course, Blake agreed. We're in this together. The following Sunday, Blake, Emma, and Sophie visited Caroline together. They had spent several days preparing Sophie, answering her questions honestly but simply. The little girl had been curious, but accepting in the way only children can be, taking the complex situation in stride. So, I have 2 mommies, she had asked. One who takes care of me and one who's been sleeping because she got hurt? That's right, Emma had confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotional difficulty, and both of us love you very much. Now, as they entered Caroline's room at the facility, Sophie held both their hands, her expression solemn but unafraid. She approached the bed cautiously, studying the still woman with intense focus. She's pretty, Sophie observed. She looks like me in the eyes. Yes, she does, Blake agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Sophie reached out hesitantly and touched Caroline's hand. Hello? I'm Sophie. I'm sorry you got hurt. I hope you wake up soon. The simple, heartfelt words brought tears to both Blake and Emma's eyes. They spent an hour in the room, Sophie chattering about her new home, her friends, her favorite toys, all the details of her life that Caroline had missed. Blake read from one of Sophie's favorite books, while Emma quietly arranged fresh flowers by the window. As they were preparing to leave, a nurse came in to check Caroline's vitals. She glanced at the monitors, then did a double take. Her heart rate increased during your visit, the nurse noted. That's unusual. She seems to be responding to you. Blake felt a surge of hope. We'll come back next week, he promised, squeezing Caroline's hand. All 3 of us. In the car on the way home, Sophie fell asleep in her booster seat, emotionally exhausted from the intense experience. Emma and Blake drove in companionable silence for a while, both processing the visit in their own way. Thank you, Blake said finally, for today, for everything. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. Not as the intimidating billionaire who had upended her life, not as the biological father threatening her relationship with Sophie, but as a man, wounded, healing, trying his best in an impossible situation. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "We're family now, however unconventional." The word family hung between them, loaded with meaning and possibility. That evening, after Sophie was tucked in bed, Blake found Emma on the terrace, wrapped in a light blanket against the coastal chill. He handed her a glass of wine and sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Patricia called," he said. "The custody paperwork is ready. We can sign it tomorrow if you're still comfortable with the arrangement." Emma nodded, sipping her wine. "I am. But Blake, there's something we need to discuss." "What is it?" "Caroline," Emma said gently. "If she improves, if she wakes up, everything changes." Blake had been thinking the same thing but hadn't found the courage to broach the subject. "I know. Where would that leave us? Leave me?" Emma asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. "I'm not just worried about my place in Sophie's life, though that terrifies me. I'm worried about this." She gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is becoming." Blake set down his glass, choosing his words carefully. "Emma, I can't predict the future. Caroline's doctors still believe her chances of significant recovery are slim, but if that miracle happens, we'll face it together. What I can promise you is that no matter what, you will always be Sophie's mother. Nothing will change that." "And us?" Emma pressed, meeting his eyes directly. "I care about you," Blake admitted. "More than I expected to. More than is perhaps wise given our complicated situation, but I won't make promises I might not be able to keep. Caroline is still my wife and I owe her my loyalty." Emma nodded, a mix of understanding and resignation in her expression. "I respect that, and I care about you too. But we need to be careful, for Sophie's sake. She's already dealing with so much change." "Agreed," Blake said. "We take things one day at a time. Focus on giving Sophie stability and security." Emma clinked her glass against his in silent agreement, and they sat together watching the moonlight play across the ocean, each lost in thoughts of what the future might hold. Inside the house, unbeknownst to them, Sophie stood at her bedroom window watching the two adults on the terrace. She didn't understand everything that had happened in her young life, but she understood enough. She had a mommy who loved her, a daddy who had found her, and another mommy who needed help to wake up. In her child's mind, it was simple. They were all supposed to be together, to help each other, to be a family. As she climbed back into bed and hugged Ellie the elephant tight, Sophie made a wish on the brightest star she could see through her window, that everyone she loved could be happy together, forever. The summer months passed in a rhythm of new routines and tentative harmony. The media frenzy around Alex Whitman's arrest eventually died down, replaced by fresher scandals. Sophie started kindergarten at an exclusive private school where Blake's influence ensured her privacy was protected. Emma found unexpected fulfillment in managing the Harrison estate and had begun taking online business courses with Blake's encouragement. Their weekly visits to Caroline continued, becoming a sacred family ritual. Sophie brought drawings and small craft projects to decorate her biological mother's room. She read books aloud in her halting kindergarten voice and told Caroline about her new friends at school. The medical staff reported continued subtle improvements in Caroline's neural responses, particularly during Sophie's animated storytelling. The legal proceedings were finalized with minimal drama, establishing Blake and Emma as Sophie's legal co-parents. Their arrangement raised eyebrows in Blake's social circles, but he had long since stopped caring about society's approval. What mattered was Sophie's happiness, which was abundant and growing. As for Blake and Emma's relationship, it existed in a careful limbo, deeper than friendship, bound by their love for Sophie, but restrained by circumstances and their own caution. Occasionally, their hands would brush as they both reached for something, or their eyes would meet across the dinner table in a moment of shared amusement at Sophie's antics. These moments brought a flush to Emma's cheeks and a quickened heartbeat to Blake that neither acknowledged openly. On a warm September evening, Blake hosted a small dinner party, his first social event since before the accident. His closest friends and business associates gathered on the terrace overlooking the Pacific, curious to meet the woman and child who had brought the reclusive billionaire back to life. Emma had been nervous about the event, Spending hours choosing an appropriate outfit from the wardrobe Blake had insisted on providing. She settled on a simple navy blue dress that complemented her eyes, elegant but not ostentatious. "You look beautiful," Blake said when she emerged from her room, his admiration evident despite his restraint. "Thank you," Emma replied, smoothing the dress self-consciously. "Are you sure this is a good idea? Meeting all your friends at once feels a bit overwhelming." "They'll love you," Blake assured her. "Besides, they've been pestering me for months. If I don't introduce you properly, Marcus has threatened to crash our breakfast some morning." The evening proved more enjoyable than Emma had anticipated. Blake's friends were intelligent, unpretentious people who welcomed her warmly and treated Sophie like a little princess. Marcus Chen, Blake's college roommate and now a renowned surgeon, entertained the little girl with elaborate napkin origami. Catherine Blackwood, Blake's chief legal counsel, engaged Emma in a lengthy conversation about her business courses, offering mentorship and connections. As the night progressed, Emma found herself on the terrace with James Sullivan, Blake's oldest friend and the godfather to his first child. James watched Sophie playing with the other guests' children on the lawn below. "It's remarkable," he said quietly. "When Blake lost Sophie and Caroline, something in him died too. I thought he'd never recover. Then you two appear on his doorstep like something from a fairy tale, and suddenly he's back, better than before even." Emma blushed slightly. "We've all been through a lot. Blake has been incredibly generous." James studied her thoughtfully. "It's more than generosity, Emma. I've known Blake for 30 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Before Emma could respond, her phone vibrated with a text message. She glanced down and froze. "Excuse me," she said to James, already moving toward Blake, who was deep in conversation with Catherine near the bar. She touched his arm lightly. "Blake, it's the care facility. They need us to come right away." The drive to Sunnyvale was tense, the car filled with unspoken fears and hopes. They had left Sophie with Mrs. Rodriguez, telling her only that they needed to check on Caroline. The text had been frustratingly vague, just a request for their immediate presence from Dr. Mitchell. "Do you think she's—" Emma couldn't finish the question. "I don't know," Blake said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They wouldn't say over the phone." When they arrived, Dr. Mitchell met them in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming so quickly. There's been a significant development in Caroline's condition." He led them to a small conference room rather than Caroline's suite, increasing their anxiety. Once the door closed behind them, Dr. Mitchell turned to face them. Earlier today, during routine care, Caroline opened her eyes. Blake felt his knees weaken. "She's awake?" "Not exactly," Dr. Mitchell cautioned. "She's showing signs of emerging consciousness. Her eyes opened, she tracked movement, and she appeared to respond to her name. These are extremely positive developments, but I need to be clear. She's not fully conscious in the way you might hope. Recovery from disorders of consciousness is a spectrum, not an on-off switch." "Can we see her?" Blake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, but prepare yourselves. She may not recognize you or respond consistently. It's also possible this is a temporary state. We've seen patients fluctuate before settling into a pattern." Emma hung back as they approached Caroline's room, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "Maybe I should wait out here. This should be private." Blake reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We do this together. You're family now." Inside the room, a nurse was adjusting Caroline's position, speaking to her in gentle, encouraging tones. When they entered, she looked up with a smile. "She's been more responsive this afternoon. I was just telling her about the beautiful sunset." Blake approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid too sudden a movement might shatter this fragile progress. Caroline's eyes were indeed open, though unfocused, staring vaguely toward the ceiling. "Caroline," he said softly, taking her hand. "It's Blake. I'm here." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her eyes shifted, moving in the direction of his voice. They didn't quite focus on him, but the movement was deliberate, responsive. "That's right," the nurse encouraged. "She's been doing that more consistently, following sounds." Blake felt tears well up, years of suppressed grief and hope breaking through at once. "Caroline, we've missed you so much. Emma and I are both here." At the mention of Emma's name, Caroline's fingers twitched slightly in Blake's hand. The movement was so small it might have been involuntary, but Blake's breath caught. "Did you see that?" The nurse nodded. "Keep talking. Familiar voices are powerful stimuli." For the next hour, Blake talked to Caroline about everything that had happened: Sophie's miraculous return, the exposure of Alex's scheme, the new life they were building. Emma remained silent, watching the intimate reunion with mixed emotions: genuine happiness for Blake, concern for Caroline, and an undeniable fear for her own place in their lives. When they finally left, Caroline had drifted back to sleep, but the medical team was optimistic. Her neural activity remained higher than before, and they planned to begin a more intensive rehabilitation program immediately. In the car, Blake was jubilant, the tension of the past months temporarily forgotten in the euphoria of hope. "It's happening, Emma. She's coming back to us." Emma smiled, genuinely sharing his joy while wrestling with her own complicated feelings. "I'm so happy for you, Blake. For Sophie, too. She'll be thrilled." Blake's excitement faltered as he registered Emma's careful wording. "For us, Emma, this is good news for all of us." "Of course," she agreed quickly. Too quickly. Blake pulled the car over to the shoulder of the coastal highway, turning to face her fully. "Talk to me. What are you thinking?" Emma stared out at the moonlit ocean, gathering her thoughts. "I'm truly happy about Caroline's improvement. I've prayed for it, for Sophie's sake and yours. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared too." "Of what?" "Of losing everything," Emma admitted, her voice small. "Sophie, you, our home. If Caroline recovers, you'll be a family again. The real family you were always meant to be. Where does that leave me?" Blake reached across the console to take her hand. "Emma, look at me." When she finally met his eyes, he continued, "Nothing about this situation is traditional or simple, but one thing is absolutely clear. You are Sophie's mother. You raised her, loved her, sacrificed everything for her. That bond is unbreakable regardless of what happens with Caroline." "And what about us?" Emma asked, the question she'd been avoiding for months. "These feelings between us that we've been pretending don't exist." Blake's expression grew troubled. "I care for you deeply, Emma, more than I thought possible after Caroline. But she's my wife, and if there's any chance of her recovery—" "You have to honor your commitment," Emma finished for him. "I understand. I respect that, Blake. I really do. But it doesn't make it any easier," he acknowledged. "No," Emma agreed softly. "It doesn't." They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below filling the car. "Whatever happens," Blake finally said, "we'll face it together, for Sophie's sake and for our own." Emma nodded, forcing a smile. Together. When they returned home, they found Mrs. Rodriguez waiting up for them, Sophie long since asleep. They shared the news about Caroline's improvement, and the kind-hearted housekeeper crossed herself, murmuring prayers of thanks. Later, lying awake in her bed, Emma stared at the ceiling, imagining a future she hadn't prepared for. If Caroline recovered, what would their lives look like? Would she remain in the mansion, a live-in nanny to her own daughter? Would she move out, establishing a separate household with shared custody? The possibilities spun in her mind, none of them satisfying. Across the house, Blake sat in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched before him. The day's events had left him emotionally drained yet wide awake. Caroline's eyes opening had been the miracle he'd prayed for during countless hospital vigils. He should be overjoyed, focused only on his wife's recovery. Yet his thoughts kept drifting to Emma. Her vulnerability in the car, the fear in her eyes, the feelings between them that had grown despite their best efforts to keep things uncomplicated. He hadn't planned on caring for her this way. It had happened gradually, naturally, built on shared purpose and daily intimacies. The way she sliced apples into perfect wedges for Sophie's lunch, the sound of her laughter during their movie nights, the fierce intelligence that emerged as she tackled new challenges. Blake took a small velvet box from his desk drawer, Caroline's wedding ring, removed by hospital staff years ago, and returned to him for safekeeping. He opened it, the diamond catching the lamplight. His vows echoed in his memory, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. He had meant those words with every fiber of his being, still did. But the world had changed, he had changed in ways he could never have anticipated. Now he found himself in an impossible position, loyal to his past, yet undeniably drawn to the future, that had unexpectedly blossomed before him. Sighing deeply, Blake returned the ring to the drawer. Some decisions couldn't be rushed. For now, he would focus on what was certain. Sophie needed both her parents, Caroline needed his support in her recovery, and Emma needed to know she wasn't alone, regardless of what the future held. Elsewhere in the mansion, unaware of the adults' turmoil, Sophie slept peacefully, Ellie the elephant clutched to her chest. In her dreams, her family was whole and happy, Mommy Emma, Daddy Blake, and Mommy Caroline all together. No complications, no divided loyalties, just love, simple and complete. Reality would be messier, as it always is. But in the quiet darkness of that September night, the three adults who loved one little girl with all their hearts made the same silent promise. Whatever came next, Sophie would be protected, cherished, and secure in the knowledge that she was loved beyond measure. 6 months passed, marking a full year since that rainy night when Emma and Sophie had appeared on Blake's doorstep. Winter gave way to spring, bringing new growth to the gardens Sophie had helped plant and new developments in their intertwined lives. Caroline's progress continued, though more slowly than they had initially hoped. She was now classified as being in a minimally conscious state rather than a vegetative one, a significant medical distinction. She could follow simple commands, track movement consistently with her eyes, and occasionally squeeze a hand in response to questions. Speech remained elusive, and her awareness seemed to fluctuate, but Dr. Mitchell remained cautiously optimistic about continued improvement. Blake visited daily, often bringing Sophie after school. Emma joined them several times a week, having overcome her initial discomfort as she watched Sophie develop a bond with her biological mother. The little girl approached these visits with remarkable sensitivity, seeming to understand intuitively what Caroline needed, sometimes quiet presence, sometimes cheerful chatter about her day. Life at the mansion had settled into comfortable patterns. Emma had completed her business courses with distinction and now managed several of Blake's charitable foundations in addition to overseeing the household. Blake had fully re-engaged with his company but made sure to be home for dinner most nights, prioritizing family time in a way he never had before the accident. Sophie thrived in this unconventional arrangement, secure in the love of both her parents and the extended family they had created. Mrs. Rodriguez had become a beloved grandmother figure, while Blake's friends had embraced Emma and Sophie as their own. The custody arrangement functioned smoothly, with Emma and Blake making decisions together about Sophie's education, activities, and health care. To the outside world, they presented a united front, co-parents committed to their daughter's well-being, nothing more. But within the privacy of the mansion, their connection continued to deepen, even as they maintained careful boundaries out of respect for Caroline. On a perfect spring morning, Emma sat on the terrace with her laptop, reviewing applications for a new educational initiative the Harrison Foundation was launching. Blake joined her, setting down 2 mugs of coffee and taking the seat beside her. "The board approved the full funding request," he said, nodding toward her screen. "Catherine was particularly impressed with your presentation yesterday." "That's wonderful news," Emma smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. "We can expand to 15 schools instead of 10. Blake watched her for a moment, admiring the passion that animated her features when she discussed the foundation work. "You've really found your calling with this, haven't you?" "I think so," Emma agreed. "Using resources to create actual change, opening doors for kids who deserve a chance. It feels meaningful in a way nothing else has." "You're remarkable," Blake said simply. "I don't know if I tell you that enough." Emma glanced at him, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you. But it's easy to do good work when you have the right support." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Emma looked away, returning to safer conversational territory. Sophie's school called. They want her to represent her class in the district science fair. Her project on butterfly migration impressed her teacher. Blake grinned proudly. "Of course it did. She's brilliant. Must get that from her mother." "Which one?" Emma asked lightly, though the question carried weight beneath its casual delivery. "Both," Blake answered without hesitation. "Caroline's scientific mind and your creativity. The perfect combination." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the gardeners work on the rose beds below. Spring had always been Caroline's favorite season, a fact Sophie had somehow intuited, insisting on planting yellow roses, her biological mother's favorite, in her garden patch. "Dr. Mitchell called this morning," Blake said finally. "They want to try a new treatment protocol with Caroline. It's experimental but showing promising results in patients with similar conditions." "That sounds hopeful," Emma said, genuinely pleased, despite the complicated emotions Caroline's potential recovery still evoked. "It is," Blake agreed, "but it would mean transferring her to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore for at least 6 months. Emma set down her coffee cup. "You'd be moving to Baltimore?" "Temporarily, yes, and I'd like to take Sophie with me, at least for part of the time." He turned to face Emma fully. "I'd like you to come too." Emma blinked in surprise. "Me? But what about the foundation work? Sophie's school?" "The foundation can be managed remotely. You've already set up most operations to run digitally. As for Sophie's school, there are excellent options in Baltimore, or we could arrange for a tutor during our stay." Blake leaned forward earnestly. "Emma, this past year has shown me something important. We work best as a team. Sophie needs both of us. I need—" He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "I value your perspective, your support." Emma studied him, reading between the lines of his careful phrasing. "And if Caroline improves significantly? If she becomes more aware, able to communicate? Then we'll navigate that together, just as we've handled everything else," Blake said. "One day at a time." Before Emma could respond, Sophie burst onto the terrace, still in her school uniform, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward them. "Mommy, Daddy, look what I made in art class." She thrust a colorful drawing toward them, beaming with pride. The artwork showed 4 figures standing in front of what was clearly meant to be the mansion. A tall man in a business suit, Blake. A woman with long brown hair, Emma. A smaller blonde woman in what appeared to be a hospital bed, Caroline. And a little girl in the middle holding hands with both women. "It's our family," Sophie announced. "Ms. Jenkins said to draw our family, and Zoe Miller said families only have one mommy and one daddy. But I told her some families are different, and that's okay." Emma and Blake exchanged glances over Sophie's head, both moved by her innocent wisdom. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Emma said, pulling Sophie into a hug. "Can we show it to Mummy Caroline on Sunday?" Sophie asked, using the name they had settled on to distinguish between her 2 mothers. "Absolutely," Blake assured her. "She'll love it." After Sophie ran off to change out of her uniform, Emma turned back to Blake. "She makes it all seem so simple, doesn't she?" "Children often do," Blake agreed. "Maybe we should take a page from her book." 2 weeks later, Emma stood in Caroline's room at Sunnyvale, saying a temporary goodbye before the medical transport would move her to Johns Hopkins the following morning. Blake and Sophie had stepped out to give her a private moment, something that would have seemed unimaginable months earlier. "I don't know if you can hear me or understand," Emma said softly, taking Caroline's hand, "but I wanted to thank you. For Sophie, she's the greatest gift of my life. And for Blake, the way he loves her, the way he honors his commitment to you, it shows the kind of man he is." Caroline's eyes were open, tracking Emma's movements with what seemed like genuine focus. "We're all going to Baltimore to be with you during this new treatment. I want you to know that I'm praying for your recovery, sincerely. Sophie deserves to know you, to learn from you." Emma paused, gathering courage. "And I want you to know that I've respected your marriage. Blake and we've been careful with our feelings, always putting you and Sophie first." To Emma's shock, Caroline's hand twitched in hers, then deliberately squeezed, the most responsive gesture she had shown yet. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. "Was that— Can you understand me?" she whispered. Caroline's eyes remained fixed on her face, and though no further response came, Emma felt something pass between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps even a blessing of sorts. The door opened softly as Blake and Sophie returned. The little girl immediately went to Caroline's side, showing her a small gift, a handmade bracelet of yellow beads. "I made this for you, Mommy Caroline," Sophie explained. "Yellow for happiness and getting better. Daddy's going to keep it safe until you can wear it." Blake placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder, noticing her emotional state. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Emma said, wiping away a tear. "Just saying, see you soon." The next day, a private medical transport flew Caroline to Baltimore, with Blake, Emma, and Sophie following on Blake's jet. They had rented a spacious apartment near Johns Hopkins, furnishing it with personal touches to make it feel like home for the months ahead. Sophie adapted to the change with characteristic resilience, excited by the adventure of a new city and the excellent science museums Blake had promised to visit. The new school welcomed her warmly, impressed by her academic progress and social confidence. The experimental treatment began immediately upon Caroline's arrival. It combined advanced neurostimulation techniques with intensive physical and cognitive therapy. The medical team was cautiously optimistic, but warned that progress would likely be measured in small increments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. 3 months into their Baltimore stay, those incremental changes began to accumulate into meaningful progress. Caroline could now consistently follow simple verbal commands. She had regained limited movement in her right arm. Most significantly, she had begun to vocalize, not words yet, but deliberate sounds that suggested the potential for speech recovery. Blake was transformed by these developments, hope rekindling the love that had never truly died, despite years of grief and separation. He spent hours at the hospital, working with therapists, talking to Caroline about their shared past and the daughter they had created together. Emma supported this revival wholeheartedly, caring for Sophie and maintaining their temporary home while Blake focused on Caroline. If she sometimes felt a pang watching his devotion to his wife, she kept it private, reminding herself of the commitment she had made to this unconventional family. On a warm summer evening, Emma sat on the balcony of their Baltimore apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in gold and pink. Sophie had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day at the aquarium. Blake was still at the hospital, having texted that he would be late. Caroline had shown particularly strong responses during the evening therapy session. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine back in California, updating her on foundation matters. She smiled, grateful for the meaningful work that kept her grounded amid the emotional complexities of their situation. Just as she finished responding, she heard the apartment door open. Blake appeared in the balcony doorway, his expression unreadable. "You're still up. Just enjoying the view," Emma said, gesturing to the chair beside her. "How was therapy today?" Blake sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Remarkable. Caroline spoke today, Emma. Actual words." Emma's heart skipped. "Blake, that's amazing. What did she say?" "My name, and then Sophie's." His voice caught. "The therapist showed her a recent photo of all 3 of us, and she clearly recognized everyone." "I'm so happy for you," Emma said sincerely, reaching for his hand. Blake accepted her touch, but seemed distracted, almost troubled. "There's more. When the therapist asked about you, Caroline said, 'Good mother.'" Emma stared at him, processing the implications. She recognizes me? Understands who I am to Sophie." "It appears so," Blake confirmed. "Dr. Patel believes she has more awareness than they initially thought, that she may have been processing and understanding conversations around her for months, even when she couldn't respond." "Which means—" Emma trailed off, the realization dawning. "She's likely heard and understood our discussions about Sophie, about our arrangement, about us." Blake met Emma's eyes directly. "And her first words about you were, 'Good mother.'" Emma felt tears welling up. I don't know what to say. Dr. Patel wants to try facilitated communication tomorrow, using a letterboard to see if Caroline can express more complex thoughts. He believes this breakthrough might lead to more rapid progress." They sat in silence for a moment, the implications hanging between them. Finally, Emma asked the question that had been hovering since Blake's arrival. "What does this mean for us, Blake? For our future?" Blake took both her hands in his expression solemn. "I don't know exactly. But I do know this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You, me, Sophie, and Caroline. We're a family now, however unconventional, and families find a way forward." Emma nodded, finding comfort in his certainty, even as questions remained. Together. The following day brought another breakthrough. Using the letterboard, Caroline slowly but deliberately spelled out a message that left the medical team astounded and Blake overwhelmed with emotion. "Blake loves Sophie and Emma. Stop waiting for me." When Blake, hesitant and confused, asked for clarification, Caroline laboriously spelled, "5 years too long, new family good." The medical team discreetly left them alone, recognizing the profound, personal moment unfolding. Blake knelt beside Caroline's bed, tears streaming down his face. Caroline, I don't understand. Are you saying—" With painful effort, Caroline moved her right hand to touch Blake's face, the first truly spontaneous movement she had made. Her eyes, more focused and present than they had been in years, conveyed what her limited communication could not: understanding, acceptance, and a profound love that transcended traditional boundaries. That evening, Blake shared the exchange with Emma, both of them struggling to process Caroline's apparent blessing. "The doctors say we shouldn't rush to interpret too much," Blake cautioned. "Her cognitive abilities are still being evaluated, and there's a long recovery ahead." "Of course," Emma agreed, "but it seems clear she understands our situation and doesn't want you to feel trapped by obligation." Blake paced the living room, emotions visibly warring within him. "For 5 years, I've lived in suspended animation, waiting for a miracle. Now that miracle is happening, but not in the way I imagined. Caroline is coming back to us, but she's telling me to move forward rather than back." "What do you want, Blake?" Emma asked softly. "Setting aside obligation, setting aside what you think is right or wrong. What does your heart tell you?" Blake stopped pacing, turning to face her with newfound clarity. "That I love you. That I've been falling in love with you since you stood in my kitchen that first night, fiercely protective of Sophie, even when you had nothing. That the life we've built together, you, me, and Sophie, is something precious that I don't want to lose." Emma's breath caught. "I love you too," she admitted, the words finally spoken after months of careful restraint. "But I need you to be certain. Caroline deserves that, we all do." "I am certain," Blake said, crossing the room to take her hands. "Whatever the future holds, Caroline's continued recovery, co-parenting arrangements, living situations, I want to face it with you as my partner, not just Sophie's mother." 3 months later, they returned to California. Caroline came with them, transferred to a rehabilitation facility near the mansion, where she could continue her remarkable progress while maintaining the close connection with Sophie that had developed during their time in Baltimore. Her recovery defied medical expectations. Though she would likely always have limitations, mobility challenges, occasional speech difficulties, her cognitive functions continued to improve. Most remarkably, she had emerged from her ordeal with an extraordinary capacity for empathy and an unconventional wisdom that surprised everyone who knew her before. It was Caroline who suggested the arrangement that eventually became their new normal: a guest house on the mansion property, renovated for her needs, where she could have independence while remaining close to Sophie. She attended school events, helped with homework, and shared special traditions with her daughter, complementing rather than competing with Emma's maternal role. Blake and Emma married in a small ceremony in the garden Sophie had planted, with Caroline in attendance as an honored guest. The media dubbed them California's most unconventional family, but those who knew them saw only love expressed in its most expansive form. On the 1-year anniversary of their return from Baltimore, they gathered on the terrace for a celebration dinner. Sophie, now 7, had insisted on planning the menu and decorations herself, proudly serving as hostess. As the adults laughed at her formal introductions of each course, Blake looked around the table with profound gratitude. Emma, his wife, brilliant and compassionate, who had appeared on his doorstep in desperation and ended up saving him in ways he never expected. Caroline, his former wife and eternal friend, who had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged with grace and generosity of spirit. And Sophie, the miraculous center of their unconventional family, who had taught them all that love transcends traditional boundaries and expectations. "A toast," Blake said, raising his glass. "To second chances, to unexpected journeys, and to the family we've created together." "To family," they echoed, glasses clinking in the golden California sunset. Later that evening, as Sophie showed Caroline her latest science project in the guest house, Blake and Emma stood on the cliffside path overlooking the ocean. The same path where a year earlier they had wrestled with impossible choices and uncertain futures. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Emma asked, leaning into his embrace. "That night when Sophie and I showed up on your doorstep, desperate and hungry?" Blake smiled, remembering her exact words. "Can I clean your house in exchange for food for my daughter?" "Never," he admitted. "But I'm learning that the best things in life are rarely what we imagine." Emma turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for taking a chance on us, for opening your door that night." "Thank you for knocking," Blake replied simply, before leaning down to kiss her as the waves crashed against the cliffs below and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In her room, surrounded by the treasures of a well-loved child, Sophie completed her latest drawing, a family portrait for her school assignment. Unlike the one she had created a year earlier, this one reflected their evolved reality. Blake and Emma standing hand in hand, Caroline in her special chair with her therapy dog beside her, and Sophie in the middle, connected to all of them. Beneath the drawing, in careful second-grade handwriting, she wrote, "My family, different but perfect." And indeed, it was. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope you've been moved by Blake, Emma, Sophie, and Caroline's journey of healing and unconventional love. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist featuring similarly heartwarming tales of redemption and found family. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore life's complexity and the many forms love can take. Don't miss our upcoming content, and please share your thoughts with us in the comments below. What was your favorite moment in this story? We can't wait to hear from you.